All right, well, good afternoon / good morning to everyone. Thanks so much for coming back to our session. We really appreciate it. I am Jessica Taylor at NASA Langley, and I'm here with my colleague, Tina Hart, and we want to share with you some of our favorite activities to do, globe activities to do with elementary age students to really highlight skills related to data literacy. Go ahead to the next slide and I'll let Tina talk you through some of the beginning of this.
So one of the goals that we have today is we're going to be looking at data literacy through an elementary lens. And as Jessica just shared with you, some of our favorite globe activities that support that. Go ahead, Emma. So the first thing we wanted to do, and if you could answer this in the chat, and we'll kind of just get an idea. How many of you work with elementary students and or teachers? I see a lot of yeses, some with teachers, yes. All right, very good. So there's a lot of us that work with teachers and or students in elementary school. And we all know the importance of beginning to help them develop skills that will guide them toward data literacy. Next slide, Emma. So how do we develop data literate citizens? According to the data literacy report that was done by Oceans of Data Institute in 2016, some of the things that they said, good places to start would be to encourage that natural curiosity that they have, but also begin to encourage them to be to use skepticism in things that they're looking at, not just accept things for face value or what they think that they're seeing, but to actually look at and take into account different factors. And to be persistent, not just give up if they don't think they have it right the first time or if things don't work. And then one that is close to all of our hearts, encourage them to ask questions. We want them asking questions. We want them thinking, looking at things, and then encouraging them to categorize simple objects and group them based on different properties or characteristics that they might have, which is another thing that we do with Globe, looking for patterns and looking for things that are similar or different in the observations that we're making. Next slide, please. So let's think about the Globe science research process that we have, and we have the poster. And one of the things I wanted us to pause for and think about, Jessica's going to put a link in the chat for the research poster, because we really kind of wanted you to look at the second image, which includes, it's 2 pages. So if you'll go to the second page in that link, that includes text associated with each of these different parts of the research process. And I want you to look for key words within those descriptions that you think relate to data literacy. And if you would put those in the chat, please. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to look at that and identify some key words that relate to data literacy. Content and process. Analyze and interpret. Ask, communicate. Really all. Look at Jody, of course. That was kind of one of the things we hoped that you would begin to see, is that all through the research process, there are words that with developing each of those different pieces, you're actually beginning to develop the skills toward data literacy. Yes, explain from evidence is a good one to pick out. So as we think about data literacy and the skills that they need to become data literate, we have a place to start. And I don't know how many of you use this research process when you're doing your Globe trainings, but we find it extremely useful, especially with teachers that we're working with, to kind of get them to help their students start with those questions that we want them to ask, and guide them through how to identify ways to investigate that question, data that they can collect, and then what to do with that data once they've collected it. Next slide, Emma. As you know, the Elementary Globe Teacher Implementation Guide has already laid out the different pieces of the science practices from the next generation science standards. And within those are a lot of those keywords and pieces from the research poster that we were looking at just a moment ago. Next slide, and I believe Jessica will pick up here.
Yeah, thanks, Tina. So you see here that we have a number of different resources already within the Globe program, from the science research process to the Elementary Globe Teacher's Guide, that are making these connections to standards or these concepts. And so in putting this presentation together, Tina and I went through and wanted to focus just a little bit on the science research or the science and engineering practices, and in particular, analyzing and interpreting data. Because it's one of the few areas that really does have something that you can differentiate by K2 learners, elementary, middle, and high school. So we're going to go through just a couple of these and see how they relate to some of these that are our favorite activities. Next slide. So the first one we have here for primary grade levels, we're talking about recording our information. Use and share representations of data, right? So pictures, drawings, writing. Use observations to describe patterns and or relationships to the natural and design worlds in order to answer science questions and solve problems. Next slide. Compare predictions, so based on these prior experiences, to what occurred, and analyze data from tests of an object or tool. So go ahead to the next slide, and this brings us to our first activity that we wanted to share. This is probably one of my favorite activities to do. This is from the Elementary Globe Seasons module called All Year Long. And the idea of this activity is students are going to draw and describe a zoomed out version of nature and a zoomed in version of nature. And so I've even done this. I've done this at conferences where I've brought the nature indoors. And so you might think of zoom out as something like a field or forest of trees, but it could also be zoomed out, might be this entire branch, right? And whereas zoom in, a student may select to do a leaf, may select to do some of the bark, might select to do some of these berries. And so you can differentiate what extreme level of zoom in and zoom out. One of the favorite things that I've heard from teachers implementing this is talking about how doing this activity helped to build students' observation skills, not just about phenology and plant living things, but she also saw improvements in their observation skills of clouds. And I think that's really important for us to think about, is that we do want these skill sets to then cross over to different content areas. And so I've definitely been able to see how that works with this activity. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So Tina's going to drop a link in the chat, and what I'd like you to do is actually participate in this one. This is another one from the Seasons module called The Colors of the Seasons. And the idea of this activity is students have a simplified data collection sheet. And in this simplified data collection sheet, like you see on your screen, the students then mark, and they're going to color into the little box the colors yellow, green, orange, purple, etc. And then they would actually write in a number for how many objects in nature did they see. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and go to our Google spreadsheet here, and I'd like you to go ahead and look out your window and fill it out. And it should be testing our skills of virtual learning. It should be connected to a bar chart that allows us to quickly see a representation of the colors that we have in nature. So I'll give you guys a minute to go ahead and do that. So I see a number of you in the sheet. This is, again, one of my favorite activities because what we're combining here is a few different things. Kristen Hunter Thompson in her presentation yesterday shared that spreadsheet with us. And in this activity alone, we've got activities or skills such as count and record. We're creating visuals, right? So in this case, a bar graph. And then also you could attach to this then questions with the students about visual aspects of this, right? So which one had the most? Which color has the most? Which color was represented the least? Then you could take this, and we talked about then changing representation from bar graph to other forms of data. And if you did this at different seasons, you would be able to then do some more comparison of what colors are more prevalent at different parts of the seasons. So I'm seeing a lot of you put some stuff in here. And I can tell you from this Google Doc here, we definitely have a prevalence of green. The next strongest color that we have out our windows right now is brown, followed by yellow and red. I see very few purple. Purple would be the least. So this is also another way for us to be able to do this activity while many of us are having to think about how to do virtual instruction. This is a way that we might be able to do that with our students and with our teachers in a PD session. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So just in case any of you were not able to do the activity, those of us from the NASA Langley team did this morning, so we may have been, swaying the data here a little bit to what is in Virginia's, our Virginia windows. But this was what we saw from that activity. And I think this is just, like I said, a quick and easy way to be able to incorporate a lot of these elements. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it. Oh, I have one more slide. Sorry, go ahead, switch to next. Because one of the things that we talk a lot about in elementary and elementary globe is then making journals. And so I just wanted to show you some examples from real student journals. The image on the left here is the zoom out and zoom in activity. And the image on the right here is the colors of the seasons. So you can see some representation of how it might look differently virtually versus if it was inside of a student notebook. Okay, now go ahead to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Tina to talk a little bit more about grades 3 through 5.
So in elementary school, they're going to begin to build off of that K2 experience where they were observing the world around them, collecting some data, and not even really realizing sometimes that that's what they're doing, but it's building those skills that they're going to need as in 3 through 5, they begin to represent that data, putting it into tables or various types of graphs that they might construct. And then once they've graphed what they've collected, they're also going to begin the stages of learning to analyze and interpret, to make sense of what they're seeing in the world around them. Continue, Emma. Thank you. Next slide. So the weather adds up to climate is another of our favorite activities. And this one can actually be used K through 5. It could be used in K2 for just beginning to construct and collect those observations. This is an example of how you could actually do this with blocks, where you glue the black base blocks on the piece of wood, and then over time throughout the month, you're going to look at the weather outside, talk about what's going on, and begin to construct a very visual bar graph right in front of you as you're adding the blocks. Continue to the next slide, Emma. So analyzing and interpreting. One of the things that I like to do is, encourage teachers as they construct these for each month throughout the school year to take a picture at the end of the month so that they have a record of the weather for that particular month. And then towards the end of the school year, they can challenge their students to arrange those pictures by month to see if they can begin to see how weather changes over time in their area across the year. And then for teachers that do this several years, they can even begin to look at different years of data, which would be an added experience that would incorporate a whole new set of being able to look at a variety of data. Next slide, please. Now, these are the data sheets that actually go with the activity where the student could have this on their own and color in to make their own bar graph. We have the one on the left that shows the weather aspects, the cloudy, the sunny, windy, rain. But then on the right, we have the one that is recording the differences in temperature as well. Next slide. So this is actually, and Jessica's going to put a link in the chat where you can access this, but this is a virtual option for that chart where the student could actually drag and drop the color that represents what they see outside their window in a similar way as to what Jessica was doing earlier, but then they can begin to record their own daily weather log. And the cool thing is when they access this link, they have to make a copy of that Google Doc, and then the teacher could actually monitor who's filling out their weather log. And so this is another way that we can help teachers in the virtual learning environment with a tool that they can use. And at the end of the month, all of the students can kind of compare their weather logs with their with other students and begin to talk about the data that they've collected. Next slide. So Jessica is going to talk about the instrument shelter and how that can be incorporated as well.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. There's some great discussion I want to just point out in the chat that's happening about maybe doing a card sort. There was also some discussion about whether or not students need to have the colors be matching in those bar charts. And so Becca Hathaway, luckily she's online and she's the PI for Elementary Globe. And all of those Elementary Globe activities have been field tested with teachers. And so she's saying in here that they reported that some students needed it and some students didn't. And from my own experience, having an elementary aged daughter with Down syndrome, I will tell you that for her to be able to count each of those, they would need to be the same color for her to be able to get through that. So certainly data literacy, as Kristen Hunter Thompson was saying, is complex, right? There are experiences that we've had or experiences that we haven't had that impact our ability to do that analysis. And so, for example, for my daughter, most of her experiences have been in counting like items, right? And so she has not yet mastered that skill to be able to count in summation items that might look different than the other items, right? And so thinking about making sure that the activity that you're doing is matching with the student and where they are at with their data literacy. So we wanted to also share with you another activity. This is not specifically an elementary globe, but it is a globe activity. It's called Studying the Instrument Shelter. And again, one of my favorite activities, you see, that was the theme of this, some of our favorites. And the reason I like this so much is it begins to also incorporate the idea of engineering design. And what students are doing here is really thinking through and purposefully separating out variables that might impact an instrument shelter. So, for example, they would get some sort of a boxes of similar sizes, and they would paint one box white and one box black and have thermometers inside and test which one has a higher temperature or does it impact temperature, right? Do they read differently? And if so, how? Again, boxes of the same size, slats, I should say slats versus no slats, right? And then what would happen, for example, if you put it at the ground level, like on the ground, versus 1.5 meters above the ground? And so I think this is, you can see how each of these begins to extend conception of data literacy and how they're using it to then understand things and ask more questions. And I think this activity in particular certainly gets us to the asking of additional questions. So again, one of my favorites. So if we go to the next slide, please. In summary, what Tina and I would really like us to think about then is, now that we've identified that globe in general, including specifically the globe research process, that throughout the whole part of the globe research process incorporates data literacy, what are we doing as a globe community to make sure to incorporate components of data literacy directly into our globe training? So we have time here to be able to talk about this for just a few minutes. So you're welcome to put things in the chat, or if any of you has a great strategy that they use in their training, you're welcome to unmute. I'm working on the browser version, so there's no way for me to see a hand raised or not. But please feel free to share out. How do you try to incorporate, or how could you incorporate elements of data literacy very proactively into your globe training? So, as people are thinking about it and maybe typing some answers, one of the ways that I've done some of this is by pointing out during a globe training what part of the globe science research process we're in, right? And trying to unpack, all right, if we're doing this activity, such as after data collection, where are we in the globe science research process? What would be some of the next steps? So we see we have some responses coming in here. Incorporate a lot of estimation for elementary teachers. Great. Another comment, sorry, a little bit before, was making sure to be thoughtful, not just about student experience with data literacy, but also our teachers' experience and their own self-efficacy and self-confidence in that arena. A safe space for learning. Yeah, making sure that we're providing these safe spaces so that way we're able to talk about some of these issues that sometimes are challenging. We'll go back to the screen with the research process here in a second. Yeah. Having kids collect the data themselves to teach math concepts. I like this idea of poster walk with teachers and have them look at posters from previous students and teachers' projects. So, in other words, science posters, right? So, what did they present at the Student Research Symposium? What have they submitted to IVSS? And have them look at how they visually represented the data. And Sarah had asked if we could go back to the item with the research process, but let me actually go ahead and I'm going to put that back in the chat where you can find the research process poster here and share that with you so you can go to see it more directly. A Jamboard. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about Jamboards. I'm learning about all of these wonderful virtual resources to help us facilitate learning in this remote world. So I'm going to pause here and go ahead and ask if there are any additional questions, because what Tina and I were really hoping to do was, again, share our favorites, connect it to those elementary data literacy skills, and really help to think about how to incorporate this into our training as Globe trainers, teachers, and partners. So with that, are there any additional questions for us? And I did want to share, if anyone is interested in the weather adds up to climate activity, the interactive student page, we did have post a link to that on our NASA Langley Globe partnership page. And if I can get my fingers to go faster, I will plop that into the chat as well. Emma, are there any other questions that you've seen?
I don't see any that you've missed in the chat.
All right, so let me add the NASA Langley research page in there, and we appreciate everyone's time, and thank you for joining us for this session.
Thank you all.